Sagittarius, the soul visitor. A sacred reunion you didn't expect. Not a dream, but a soul reunion. Sagittarius, some nights are not like the others. You don't plan for them. You don't sense them coming. But when they arrive, the air changes, as if the whole world is holding its breath with you. You wake in the middle of the night, not startled, not afraid, but aware. The darkness feels different, alive, as though someone has just stepped into the room. Not with footsteps, but with presence. Your skin tingles, your heartbeat slows, and an ancient part of you leans forward in recognition. You cannot see them, yet you know. This is not a stranger. This is a soul you have known beyond the borders of time. Maybe a loved one from another life. Maybe a piece of your own essence that you left behind somewhere along the way. They have not come to take from you. They have come to return something. A truth. A memory. A light you once carried before the world taught you to dim it. And in that suspended moment, the universe seems to whisper, "It's time to come back to yourself." What follows is not a haunting, but a homecoming. If you've ever felt that something or someone is trying to remind you of who you are, then stay with me until the end. This is Zodiac Wisdom. I'm Sophia, and here we speak to the parts of you the world forgets to honor. Like, share, and subscribe if you're ready to step into the sacred space your soul has been waiting for. Gate 1. The soul knocks when you stop resisting. Sagittarius, you've spent so much of your life sprinting through invisible storms, chasing expectations that were never entirely yours, and wearing the armor of someone who can handle it. You are the adventurer, the visionary, the one who carries both your own weight and the emotional burdens of those around you. People look at you and see light, not realizing that even light gets tired when it is always expected to shine. Over time, you learn to keep moving because slowing down felt dangerous, as though stopping would mean being swallowed by everything you've been avoiding. Grief, doubt, unspoken longing. But here's the truth the universe has been patiently waiting for you to discover. The soul cannot be heard over the constant roar of motion. That night, the one when everything felt still, was no accident. You weren't weak. You weren't lost. You were finally quiet enough to be found. The presence that came to you did not arrive because you were broken. It arrived because you had stopped fighting the silence. In your exhaustion, you laid down the armor, and in that vulnerable space, the door of your spirit creaked open. That's when they entered. You may wonder, who was they? The soul visitor could be many things. For some Sagittarians, it's the energy of an ancestor who has been walking beside you for years, waiting for the moment when you'd notice the brush of their hand against your spirit. For others, it's the echo of someone you loved deeply but could not keep in this lifetime, a bond that physical death or emotional distance could not sever. And for some, it's not another person at all, but a version of yourself you thought was gone forever. The you who believed without fear. The you who lived with wonder instead of caution. This visitor did not come through the front door. They entered through the side passage of your soul, the one you forgot existed, the one that has always been ajar, no matter how tightly you thought you had locked yourself away. Because somewhere, in the deep hours of another lifetime, you called them. Maybe you whispered it as a prayer during a night you cried yourself to sleep. Maybe you spoke it in silence, holding your own hand in the dark. The call was simple. Don't let me forget who I am. And they listened. They've been listening all along. What's important to understand is that this visit wasn't about answers. They didn't come to explain why the past unfolded the way it did. They didn't come to warn you about the future. They came to stand in the space between what you've endured and what you are about to become, holding a lantern you've forgotten you gave them long ago. That lantern was always meant to guide you back to yourself. I know, Sagittarius, that you've been told to be strong so many times that strength has become your default state, even when you're quietly shattering inside. But the soul visitor reminds you that real strength is not in how well you endure alone. It is in allowing yourself to be witnessed, even if the one witnessing you is a presence you can't touch or name. They remind you that your fire was never meant to flicker out unnoticed in the dark corners of your own life. There is a reason they chose now. Not a month ago. Not a year ago. Now. Because the soul knows timing better than any clock. It knows when your heart has finally loosened its grip on the stories that kept you small. It knows when your spirit is tender enough to receive without suspicion. And it knows when you're ready to remember the promises you once made to yourself, the ones you've been too busy or too afraid to keep. Some of you will try to rationalize this away. You'll tell yourself it was a dream, a trick of the mind, the product of stress and fatigue. And that's fine, your mind will do what it does to feel in control. But your body knows the truth. The shiver down your spine, the sudden ache in your chest, the strange, unprovoked tears, these are not signs of fear. They are signs of recognition. Signs that something sacred brushed against you and left its imprint. And here's the most important part. They are not here to stay. The soul visitor's gift is not in their lingering, it is in their departure. Because what they leave behind is not themselves, but the memory of your own fire. They're not here to walk your path for you, Sagittarius. They're here to point you back to the trail you wandered from, the one lined with wildflowers and starlight, the one you thought you'd never see again. In that sense, the soul visitor is not an intruder, they are a guidepost. They are proof that the universe will always send you what you need, in the exact moment you are ready to receive it, no sooner and no later. And whether they come again or not is irrelevant. What matters is that you have been reminded. You have been awakened. You have been seen. Sagittarius, you didn't imagine it. And you didn't make it up because you were lonely. You opened the door, and something sacred stepped in. And from now on, no matter how loud the world gets, a part of you will always remember what it felt like to be touched by that kind of truth. Gate 2 soul memory lives in the body, not the mind. Sagittarius, when the visitor arrived, they didn't speak in words your mind could grasp. They spoke in language older than thought, a language your body never forgot. That's why, even before you could understand what was happening, you felt it. A sudden shiver that wasn't from the cold. A shift in the air that had nothing to do with the wind. The way your heart seemed to change tempo. As if it had recognized someone before your eyes could see them. And maybe without warning, your eyes welled with tears you couldn't explain. That wasn't weakness. That was memory. Not the kind of memory you can recall like a photograph. No, this was soul memory stored not in your head, but in your skin, your bones, the very rhythm of your breath. Because while the mind forgets, the body always remembers. It remembers the moment someone first believed in you without asking you to prove yourself. It remembers the safety you felt in an embrace where you didn't have to be worthy to be held. It remembers the joy of laughing without checking who was watching. The purity of loving without fear of loss. And it also remembers the other things, the things you've tried to bury. The first time you felt abandoned, even if no one spoke the words aloud. The way your chest tightened when someone you trusted turned away. The exhaustion that comes from carrying disappointment you were never meant to hold. Over the years, you've carried not just your own heartbreak, but the unprocessed grief of others. Friends, family, lovers. People who poured their shadows into you because they didn't know what else to do with them. And because your heart is vast, you accepted it, thinking that love meant keeping what wasn't yours. This is why the visitor came, not to remind you of the pain itself, but to help you see what you've been storing in the corners of your being. You can't heal what you can't name, and sometimes you can't name it until your soul is ready to feel it. That night, you were ready. The presence moved through you like a hand brushing dust off a treasured object, revealing not just what you've lost, but what you've been hiding from yourself. I've seen this happen with others, Sagittarius. There was a woman once who told me she dreamt of a figure standing by her bed, holding a small bundle wrapped in light. She couldn't see the figure's face, but she felt a calm so deep it almost frightened her. In the dream, the bundle was placed in her arms, and when she woke up, she was crying, not from sadness but from relief. She realized she had been carrying her mother's unspoken fear of abandonment her entire life, a fear her mother had never put into words but had passed on in the way she loved. That night, the visitor had come to take it back. That's the thing, not everything you're holding is yours. Some of it is inherited from generations past. Some of it was picked up in moments when you were too young to understand what you were agreeing to carry. And some of it was quietly handed to you in relationships where you played the role of savior, caretaker, or safe harbor. It's no wonder you feel tired in ways sleep doesn't fix. The weight is real, even if it's invisible. When the visitor comes, they're not interested in giving you new answers. They're here to help you unclench your fists, to show you that letting go of what's not yours doesn't mean you're abandoning someone. It means you're finally returning what was never meant to be stored in your spirit. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to hand someone their own story back, even if it's heavy, even if they're not ready to take it. You may feel physical shifts during this. A release in your shoulders, a warmth in your chest, A deep sigh that feels like it came from years ago. These are not random. They are signs that your body is making space. Space for your own breath, your own truth, your own fire. And once you feel that lightness, it's impossible to go back to carrying what isn't yours. Remember this, Sagittarius. The mind will always try to make sense of things, but the soul doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in resonance. And when something resonates that deeply, it bypasses thought entirely and goes straight to where the real remembering happens, in the body. That's why you don't need to understand everything right now. You only need to honor what you feel. Because feeling it fully is the first step in releasing it completely. And when you release, you don't just set yourself free. You also free every part of you that's been waiting to come home. Gate 3. They are not a guest, they are a companion. Sagittarius, here's the truth. What arrived in the quiet of that night wasn't an intruder, and it wasn't passing through like a stranger on the road. They didn't come to take from you. They didn't come to stir chaos. They came because they belong, not to your house, not to your possessions, but to the sacred terrain of your soul. And when something belongs there, it doesn't knock. It simply enters because the door was always meant for them. For so long, you've treated your healing like a closed room, only stepping inside when you had the energy to face the dust. You've been both gatekeeper and prisoner, deciding who gets close enough to see your fractures, and keeping even yourself at a distance from the most tender places. But this companion, they didn't need your permission to enter, because a deeper part of you, the part beyond fear, already invited them long ago. Maybe in another lifetime. Maybe in a moment you've forgotten. During one of those days when your heart was soft and unguarded. They are not here to pity you, Sagittarius. They are here to walk beside you, to stand in the quiet corners where no one else dared to stand. You might not recognize them in form, but you'll recognize the way the air feels different when they are near. It's like standing in sunlight after days of rain. Not blinding, not burning, but warm enough to remind you you've been cold for too long. I think of a man I once knew who told me about a dream during a difficult chapter in his life. In the dream, he was sitting on the floor of an empty room, knees to his chest, feeling like he had failed everyone he loved. Then the door opened and someone walked in. Not saying a word, just sitting beside him. Hours passed in silence. When he woke, he realized he couldn't recall their face, but he remembered the feeling. I'm not alone in this. Someone can bear witness to my pain without trying to fix it. That's the difference between a guest and a companion. Guests expect to be hosted. Companions sit on the floor with you. Your soul visitor is that kind of presence. They don't need explanations. They don't keep track of your progress like a scorecard. They don't demand you hurry through your grief or rearrange your story to make it easier to hear. They understand that the real alchemy happens not when you are rushed into healing, but when you are allowed to inhabit your truth without fear of being abandoned. Perhaps they are a fragment of your younger self, returning to show you how to be fearless again. Perhaps they are the echo of someone you loved so fiercely that the connection never unraveled, even when life pulled you apart. Or maybe they are the archetype of what you've been missing. The steady, patient love you were never given, now arriving in a form your spirit can finally accept. Whatever their nature, they carry no agenda except to stand with you while the unnecessary weight falls away. And this is where the shift begins. You start to realize you don't need to walk every step alone. You've been taught to be self-reliant to the point of isolation, to be your own anchor, your own safe harbor. But even the strongest souls are not meant to sail without a witness to the journey. This companion doesn't change the storms outside. They change the way you weather them. With them, silence no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like presence. The shadows in your room no longer feel like threats. They feel like a backdrop to the soft glow beginning to spread inside you. And perhaps the most healing part is this. They don't just come to share the weight of what's heavy. They come to remind you that some burdens were never yours to begin with. You will find that in their presence your breathing slows. The sharp edges inside your chest begin to soften. You stop bracing for the next blow. And little by little, without fanfare, you notice something you haven't felt in a long time: safety. Not the fragile, conditional safety that can be taken away, but the kind that grows from knowing you are seen and not judged, known and not diminished. Sagittarius, this is not a fleeting encounter. It is a sacred companionship, even if they never speak, even if they never return in the same way again. What matters is the imprint they leave. The reminder that you are allowed to be witnessed in your most unguarded state, and that true connection doesn't require you to earn your place. And maybe, just maybe, this companion is here to prepare you for the next step, the moment when you finally reclaim the parts of yourself you thought were gone forever. Gate for receiving back what you dropped. Sagittarius, there is a strange thing that happens when you are finally ready to see what you've lost. The lost parts begin to find their way home. Not with fireworks, not with trumpets, but in small, steady returns. It begins with a flicker in your chest, a memory rising out of nowhere. The way your body suddenly remembers how it once felt to laugh without hesitation. You might notice the way your voice sounds different, freer, lighter. When you speak about your dreams now, you might find yourself humming again while doing ordinary things. These are not accidents. These are homecomings. Think of it like a trail of breadcrumbs your soul left for you in the moments when you thought you were breaking. That time you stood in the rain and felt strangely at peace. That quiet afternoon you wrote words you didn't show anyone, but they carried a truth you'd been hiding. That fleeting moment of courage when you said no to something that didn't feel right. Those were all pieces of yourself being tucked away for safekeeping, waiting for the day you'd be strong enough to gather them again. This is the day. Receiving what you dropped is not about going back to who you were before the hurt. That version of you is gone, and that's not a tragedy, it's transformation. The self you're reclaiming now carries the depth of everything you've survived. The innocence returns, but it's no longer naive. The passion returns, but it's steadier, less desperate for approval. The hope returns, but now it is rooted in reality. You're not stepping backwards into an old life. You're stepping forward into a fuller one. Sometimes what returns will surprise you. The way your creativity bursts back after years of silence. The way your trust in people starts to rebuild, even if cautiously. The way your body moves more freely because it's no longer armoring itself every second. And here's the most tender part. When these pieces return, they don't ask where you've been. They don't demand an explanation. They simply merge back into you, as if no time has passed, because they were always yours. I think of a woman who once told me about the years she spent feeling invisible, both in her career and her relationships. She had buried her joy so deep she forgot she used to paint, laugh loudly, wear bright colors. Then one afternoon while cleaning, she found an old box of photographs, her younger self in a red dress, grinning so wide her eyes nearly closed. I didn't recognize her at first, she said. But then I realized she's been waiting for me. From that day she wore color again. She laughed without checking who was watching. She painted for hours without caring if anyone saw the results. That's what it means to receive yourself again. There is a quiet power in this stage, Sagittarius. It's the kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself. You simply begin to move differently. You make choices that honor you without overthinking how they'll be perceived. You stop apologizing for your joy. You start creating without asking if it's practical. You allow yourself to be seen as you are, not as you've been told to be. And perhaps the greatest gift of receiving back what you dropped is that you stop fearing loss the way you once did. You understand now that the most important parts of you are never truly gone. They may step into the shadows for a time, but they will return when you're ready to carry them again. That readiness is here. So when you wake tomorrow and notice a strange lightness in your step, when you catch yourself smiling for no reason, when you realize your heart feels a little less guarded, know this: the reunion has begun. The door is open, and piece by piece, the person you thought you had to abandon is finding their way back. Not to the old life, but to the new world you've built from the ashes. And this, Sagittarius, is not the end of the story. It's the threshold of the next chapter, where you walk forward whole, not because life has been perfect, but because you've called every missing part of yourself home. Conclusion: they don't stay, but they leave the light. Sagittarius, not every soul visitor is meant to walk beside you for the rest of your days. Some arrive quietly in the soft hours of night to deliver something precious and then fade back into the unseen. This is not loss, this is sacred exchange. They came to return what you forgot, to place the missing piece gently back into your hands, and to remind you that you have always been more whole than you believed. Their departure does not leave you empty. It leaves you illuminated. The light they leave behind is not the kind you can turn on and off. It's the kind that seeps into your bones, into the way you breathe, into the choices you make. You carry it into every room you enter, and people feel it even if they can't name it. It's the softness in your eyes when you look at yourself in the mirror. It's the steady ground under your feet when you say yes to what matters and no to what drains you. It's the quiet confidence that you can walk into the unknown and still find your way home. This reunion was never about the visitor. It was always about you. About remembering, reclaiming, and reuniting with the self you thought had been lost to time, pain, or circumstance. Now, as you stand here at this new threshold, you are no longer searching for validation outside yourself. You are no longer bending to fit a space that cannot hold you. You are no longer waiting for permission to be fully alive. The door in your soul that opened that night is still open, not to let the world take from you, but to let your own light flow outward. And as it does, you'll find you don't need to rush, prove, or perform. You are enough in your stillness, in your movement, in your becoming. So walk forward, Sagittarius. Carry the light they left behind, and let it merge with the fire that has always been yours. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a life that is fully, fiercely, beautifully your own. If this touched something deep inside you, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe to Zodiac Wisdom. Let's keep walking this path together, where your soul is remembered, your heart is honored, and your light is never forgotten again.